Woman walks 12 miles to work every day. Doesn't know she's being watched. Another day, another dollar, right? Well, for this woman, another day was another 12 miles of walking to get that dollar. While many Americans get to work by car, bus, or train, this woman walked 6 miles to work and then the same 6 miles to get home. No one likes to have to spend too much time on the commute to work. You often end up spending the journey feeling anxious about the day ahead. Perhaps you have an important meeting or some strict deadlines to meet. All things considered, the shorter the commute, the better. When Jalessia Corbett decided to take a job that was much farther from home than she had hoped, she knew that getting to work wouldn't be simple. At the time, she couldn't have imagined that her work commute would end up changing her life with just one chance encounter along the route. Jalessia Corbett was walking on the shoulder of one of the busier roads in town. She was on her way to work, and she would definitely count this particular morning as one of the more unpleasant work commutes that she'd had to suffer through. It was usually dark during her commute, seeing as she went out at the incredibly early hour of 3 in the morning. But today the rain was pounding down against the pavement, and her small umbrella didn't seem to be protecting her. The dark dreariness of it all made her feel a little uneasy. Then she noticed headlights. Someone was slowly pulling up behind her. Corbett always tried to remain cognizant about her surroundings when she was on these early morning walks. Her eyes darted behind her as she noticed the strange light approaching. She began to look around and saw that she was alone. No one was in sight besides her and this mysterious car. Half curious, half panicked, Corbett hoped that the car had slowed down just to avoid splashing her with water. But she quickly realized that this wasn't the case. She picked up her pace as the car crept next to her. Corbett couldn't see who was inside. Little did she realize just how that driver was about to change her life. The heavy downpour of rain was making it hard to see exactly who was pulling up next to Corbett, but as the car came more into focus, it became clear at least what was driving beside her. There was no mistaking that the vehicle was a police car. But why? As far as she could tell, she hadn't done anything wrong. The truth was that the police officer inside had seen Corbett before and knew her story. That morning, the man she would soon learn was named Sergeant Scott Bass, decided to intervene. What he didn't know was how quickly everything would snowball as a result of his actions. While this morning's trek through the cold and the rain was particularly miserable, Corbett was used to mornings like this. In fact, every morning she walked 6 miles to work, clocked in an 8-hour shift at her local Bojangles Chicken and Biscuits restaurant, and then walked those same 6 miles back home. In an interview, she explained how she found herself in this position. I applied to several Bojangles, and the farthest one from my house called me first, so I said, okay, I'll work at this one, and I'll walk since I had no other way to get out there. It had become her normal routine, but that morning was already far from normal. Finally approaching the cop car. Corbett didn't have another way to get to work, and her only option was to walk, even if that meant coming to work during a storm. Rain, sleet, shine, she wouldn't let the elements affect her sense of purpose. She explained in an interview, I still walk. How else am I supposed to pay the bills? The Bojangles employee knew that she wouldn't be able to just ignore the cop driving beside her. She nervously tried to figure out if she was doing anything odd or illegal, something that would attract an officer's attention. But Corbett could not figure out an explanation and decided to get one herself. She approached the police vehicle. Corbett ambivalently went up to the policeman as he rolled down his window. Can I help you, officer? She asked. Immediately, she felt a bit more at ease as Sergeant Bass flashed her a smile. He saw the woman shivering in the cold and rain and asked her if she wanted a ride. I said, yeah, I could use a ride, Corbett later said in an interview. She was thankful to get some shelter from the storm, even if that meant an awkward commute in a police car. Nervously, she stepped inside and shut the door. She didn't know that this decision would soon become the subject of national headlines. In her months of working at Bojangles, not a single person had ever offered to give Corbett a ride to work. She was happy that she'd had some time to dry off on her way to her shift, but she wasn't very quick to trust the police officer. Other than initially asking where exactly she worked, Corbett and Sergeant Bass were both silent for the entire car ride. The silence let Corbett's mind wander. Cop or not, she'd just gotten into a car with a strange man in the middle of the night during a rainstorm. Could she have written a more perfect start to a horror movie? A year goes by. For about a year after he'd met Corbett, Sergeant Bass continued to pick his new friend up on rainy or cold mornings. The rides started to become something of a tradition. There were even some days when Sergeant Bass would show up unannounced during a perfectly clear day, still offering a ride to cut back on Corbett's work commute. Even on days when Sergeant Bass couldn't make it to Corbett's home, he'd reach out to other officers on the force to see if they had time to help. Over the course of the year, the two became increasingly close. But as time went on, Sergeant Bass began to have second thoughts. New work commute. In Corbett's mind, Sergeant Bass had gone above and beyond to help her out on her work commute. However, the way Sergeant Bass saw it, he wasn't doing nearly enough. "She walks 2 hours to work and then she's got to stand for 8 hours," he said. "I know what it's like to have to work that hard." As the days went on, he said, "It just kind of really weighed on me and bothered me. And every day that I gave her a ride, I just, for some reason, would talk to my wife about her," he said. With his wife, he would discuss how he felt like his help wasn't even scratching the surface of what his new friend needed. So he came up with a plan. The manager of the local Walmart was touched by Corbett's story as well as Sergeant Bass's desire to help out. The store gave him a free beach cruiser bicycle to pass along to Corbett. He immediately went to deliver it to his new friend, but her reaction wouldn't have been one of the most surprising ones he was about to receive. Together, Sergeant Bass and Corbett took a picture outside of her home, posing with her brand new bicycle. Once Sergeant Bass got back to work and his bosses saw the picture, they decided to share it online. "We're so proud of Sergeant Scott Bass and his selfless service he provides on a daily basis," the Facebook post said. Yet what had started as a simple post quickly led to the unthinkable. In a world of negative news, it seemed that the positive message and story behind the Nash County Sheriff's Office Facebook post quickly caught on. Everyone in town was suddenly talking about the tale of a cop, a Bojangles employee, and a bike. They didn't know that there was about to be a whole new chapter added to the story. By the time that Corbett and Sergeant Bass began to appear on local news stations, Corbett's employers at Bojangles had already heard her story. But as the story continued to garner attention across the country, even some of the executives high up in the restaurant chain began to take notice. On the day of the show's taping, Corbett and Sergeant Bass sat there on stage in front of the studio cameras to share their heartwarming story with one of the most beloved faces in talk show history. As the segment was wrapping up, Harvey addressed Corbett directly. "We know that you work hard, and we know that you deserve a little extra help," Harvey said. "On behalf of the show, we're going to be giving you $5,000. It was apparent to all, whether sitting in the studio audience or watching at home on television, that Corbett's eyes were beginning to tear up. Harvey continued, "But that's not all." Before Corbett even approached her brand new car, she embraced her loyal friend, Sergeant Bass. As generous as Steve Harvey's gift had been, she knew that no step of this entire journey could have been possible without the help of the local police officer. In a world of negative news, when people get wind of a story like this, they tend to embrace it. This is what happened when Nash County Sheriff's Office shared it on their Facebook page. It wasn't long before everyone was talking about it. The post accumulated thousands of comments and likes. Even people living far from Nash County began to share the post with their friends. Everyone seemed to be talking about this incredible story. This was nothing compared to what would follow. Over the next few days, the post gained more and more traction. The story was being shared online, and its reach was growing exponentially. This continued until the story had been seen by people all over the country. Corbett's story had already been heard by all of her colleagues at the restaurant she worked at, Bojangles, by the time the pair were due to appear on local news stations. As the story continued to gain attention across the country, even some of the executives high up in the restaurant chain began to take notice. Just a year and a half before, Sergeant Bass saw Corbett struggling silently and decided to take time out of his own busy day to help her out. And in that moment, sitting on the stage of a national television show, he could finally see how far his simple act of kindness had gone. He hoped to himself that his goodwill would inspire others to help out their neighbors. Before going over to the car and taking a closer look, Corbett reached out to her new friend, Sergeant Bass, to give him a huge hug. Everything she was experiencing in this moment would not have been possible if this local police officer hadn't offered her a lift out of the kindness of his heart on that rainy morning. However, that day was particularly unpleasant. The sudden bursts of rain made her usual routine a lot more difficult. She had her umbrella that she took from home, but when she tried to open it, the strong winds took it right out of her hand. Nevertheless, she persisted on with her journey to get to work. Obligation is an ego-based way of understanding values. I must be the right kind of person, and the right kind of person helps others. That's the road where helping others makes sense because that's who we all are, rather than because I think I'll make myself a good person thereby or whatever.